Very special good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Degenerate Friday edition of Bury Your Bookie. I'm Jeff DeForrest, going to be joined here by the professor who, as the great Lee Pete used to always say, when he would turn to some guy, it looked like he slept in the trunk of his car on the old Proline show. He would just turn and, with great authority and conviction, say, "The man is on fire." And the professor has been exactly that for us here on the program in college basketball. 4 games as the Sweet 16 got underway last night. And I happened to be at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino here in South Florida, and it was jamming. And I didn't put any money down while I was there. I was there for another reason. I was watching this bare knuckle fighting, which is quite a phenomenon for an old boxing guy like me that goes way back and would have easily been part of the inspiration for the title The Geezers at Caesars. Seeing this activity was certainly unique. I guess it's Gen Z that's going to be involved in that. And they packed the house and the good job would be maybe the best job in sports is to be a cut man for the bare knuckle fighting championships. You would never be out of work. Everybody, even a referee, was spilling some blood last night. But I was there and I'm watching the action in the sports book, and I'm thinking, well, I just want to be right about these games or have our handicappers be validated as being accurate in their selections. So everybody was reveling in the over. 175. We welcome the professor into the program. The over or under 175 for a college basketball game. How uncommon is that? I mean, what's the biggest number you've ever seen, Professor? College basketball over.
Ever?
Yeah, I mean, typically, what would it be? Like, well, 140, 150?
I mean, I think your average number's in the 150s somewhere.
Yeah.
But ever, no. You have to go back to the Loyola Marymount days, and
Okay. Yeah. They
it
were
would
putting up
be
150 or
well into no, it would be like well into the 200s. That last year, prior to the passing of Hank Gathers, remember Loyola Marymount would play. The one that really sticks out in my mind was like a big matchup, and it was Oregon State with Gary Payton, who was like a top 5 team, and Loyola Marymount with Gathers and Kimball were like in the top 10. I want to say the final was like 140 to 130 or something like that, and it was just constant end to end, no defense, up and down, jacking threes, and it was a fantastic game. But I distinctly remember the total was well into the 200. So I want to say it was like 210.
Oh, it makes
Um,
sense. I mean, they were putting up 150. Actually, I had an interview with Paul Westhead. He was like 80 years old a couple of years ago at the time, and he'd put a book out. And I would imagine the book is fascinating because he really was brilliant in the way that he dissected basketball and what's going on. And he was the first guy to say, hey, we want to get a shot off within 5 seconds of the shot clock.
and it's ideally a clean 3-pointer. I mean, in a lot of ways, that Loyola Marymount team was the forerunner to what started going on in Europe, which became the forerunner to what's going on in the NBA and college basketball. Right? They
Yeah.
were decades ahead of their time, and I mean, now we're basically not going to play defense thing, not so much. But their offensive principles were basically, they played that 4 around the 3-point line and Gathers underneath offense, which became the forerunner of European offense, which again became the way the NBA and college basketball is played now.
Their whole game was to let it fly. If you are letting it fly, and we'll get into the tournament games and some selections here from the professor, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for betting on all of the madness. Even if your bracket is busted, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action. They're constantly updating your ability to get involved and even be involved in some of these betting pools. With the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to MLB, the NHL, MMA, they may have even had action on that bare knuckle fighting championships last night that I was at the Hard Rock. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for sports betting. Every Cinderella story is covered, every hat trick. BetOnline has you covered with the odds, the stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, some people have been crying that it was a chalk festival, the tournament to this point, that
They've been
there
right.
weren't really a lot of buzzer beaters, not
There was
tremendous
there was
drama.
one, and it was a blatant travel.
Yeah, and while that's been debated, still it was a pretty good shot. It was
It was
sort of
great.
indicative and reminiscent of that championship game between North Carolina and Villanova.
I mean, it
Where
was a great play, but if you went back into the studio and watched and you saw like the pained look on Jay Wright and Clark Kellogg's face
yeah.
as they kept playing this, and he said Jay Wright basically loses. He's like, "That's a travel. That's a travel." And I share his pain because like the NBA has actually rewritten rules where like it's not a travel, it's a gather step where you pick up the ball
Yeah.
and then you get like 2 extra steps. I mean, I you know I share his pain in that, and very often what we've known as the rules of basketball are no longer the rules of basketball to the point where at least at the NBA level they're actually rewriting the rules. I didn't even know that the NBA had included the gather step in the rule book
Which is
at this.
absurd, by the way, because if you had constantly made those calls, and you were the one who was benefiting from this gather and then two steps in the park, the air would be under your tires as you were trying to exit.
Well, again, and there are dudes, Giannis being really the easy go-to example, but Jason Tatum does it all the time, where it's not a gather step, it's like a gather 3 steps.
Yes,
And they're so fast and their feet are so quick. By the time they gather, they've actually taken 2 or 3 steps there. I look to the people who are unhappy with this NCAA tournament. I really do understand it. Look, the first weekend, everybody wants to see the gigantic upsets. Everybody wants to see Bucknell beat Duke. Everybody wants to see East Tennessee State over Iowa State as a two
right.
seed. That's why we tune in on the first weekend. And the biggest upset was a 12 over a 5. And honestly, we didn't get the buzzer beaters. We didn't even get like a bunch of super competitive games. Um, and I get it, but the same token, you turn around and the television's ratings are as high as they've been in 24 years. So I mean, and by the way, even more, the number that just blew me off my chair, uh, without Caitlin Clark, the women's tournament is up 3% over last year. Like, and
Wow.
that I honestly thought if the women's tournament lost 10% off of last year without Caitlin Clark, that would be a great number. I I couldn't believe it when I saw that number. I was like, wow. I mean, so whether it's the betting influence, whatever, maybe it's the next generation really adopting college basketball instead of and this is by the way at a time where the NBA television ratings get worse every single year to the point where the television contracts look like an absolute disaster. College basketball is doing really well ratings wise, at least in the tournament. I don't know what the regular season numbers were for the men, but again, women's up 3%, which was without without the I don't know mega force, the tsunami in broadcasting that was Caitlin Clark. That number absolutely stunned me.
Very surprising because I have to say, I just happened to tune in for a brief moment to the women's game the other night, and it was the exact precise moment when Juju Watkins is out there on a break. She's kind of going 1-on-2.
Wow.
She tries to split horses as she is turning for home. You're thinking she's probably going to do something spectacular here, and goes down writhing in agony. And I thought, well, there goes a lot of my interest in the women's tournament.
I mean, I
Although
won't lie. To me, it's the non-competitive games. It's
yeah,
you're looking at scores, and it's like halftime, 42 to
50-point games, yeah.
6. Final score 83 to 32 or whatever. Um, that chases me away from the game. But a lot of people are embracing it, and it's funny. I hear people complaining about the men's tournament while at the same time embracing the women's tournament. It's kind of that weird thing where, like, in women, they want the blowouts by
Yeah.
the big name teams, whereas the men, if Fairleigh Dickinson isn't beating a number one seed, everybody's unhappy about it.
It was interesting last night. So many people on this show, and as I said, it's not really about the money all the time. It's about being right. And we had our guys that were all over, literally the over, in that Bama BYU game, which you were a huge BYU advocate throughout the early stages of the tournament because they could shoot the three ball. You had
Yep.
everybody labeled as some kind of Jimmer Fredette
Correct.
over, or
Headband Jimmer, Greek Jimmer. Yeah, there's a
facsimile,
lot of Jimmers.
and Bama. Wow, I mean, that's exceptional. Look, anytime you do something that's unprecedented, you'd have to think that's going to be hard to sustain. But the 3-point shooting by Alabama last night, in addition to everything else that they did, they throttled a team that many thought was going to be at least within the point spread, if not without an outright chance to win.
And for the first 10 minutes or so, it looked like it probably was going to go that way. But then Bama just kept knocking down 3-pointers the entire night. Obviously, Sears, who's their best player, and one of my favorite players in the country, had a Steph-like game, I guess you would say. Got to the basket whenever he wanted to, dished out 8 assists off of that, and knocked down. I don't know if he fell one short of the tournament record of tying the tournament record, or if he tied it and fell one short of the record, but basically a record performance from the 3-point line. I was on the Bama side there. I wasn't on the total, but obviously over players dancing in the street. I was talking about it with Luby before the game. He was like 175. They're never going to make 175. They were over 175 with 6 minutes left to play. So,
Unreal. Yeah.
incredible performance in that game. Not a competitive game, but I would say entertaining. And then again, and we can get into today's picks about it. I thought the numbers coming into this round, the Sweet 16 round, was probably as a group as close to where I would personally make the numbers ever, which made, for some tough. The only thing we really liked last night was Alabama. And I think to some degree that kind of held true. The Florida game obviously ended up Florida covering relatively easy, but it was a 2-point game at halftime. Duke basically lost the cover in the last 2 minutes or so of the game. And the other game went to overtime, which I guess if you were in Arkansas, you got a fairly comfortable ride, although there were a couple moments in overtime where you're like, damn, we were winning this game the whole way and we're going to blow it in the last 2 minutes of overtime. Didn't turn out that way. Ended up a 2-point game. But again, very difficult numbers last night. And I think very difficult numbers again tonight. Sparty laying 3.5 to Ole Miss. That's about exactly where I would personally make that number. Maybe 3 without the hook. The one game I do like tonight is Kentucky. Was 4.5. I'm seeing it's trending down here on Hard Rock there. Down to 4 there. I still like Kentucky plus the 4. And then you get into the 2 number 1 seed game. Auburn has trended down a little bit, down to 8.5. I still think that's a very difficult number. I know a lot of people are on Michigan. I do not necessarily love the Michigan side. I think the Michigan guards, which in very Dusty May style, they tend to run a little bigger. I think they're going to have trouble dealing with the quickness and athleticism of the Auburn guards there. And then Houston, also 8.5 to Purdue. At least that's a number I'm currently showing. I think Houston's going to win the game, but again, I think it's 8.5 with a total of like 130 something. It's tough to cover 8.5 when the total's running in the 60s there. That becomes a very big ask for the Cougars defensively. And Purdue doesn't turn the ball over, and they shoot threes pretty well. It's tough to cover a big ass number against a team like, I'm looking at the totals I'm showing are Houston 8.5 with a 131.5 total. Well, if you're taking Houston there, you probably got to take the over with it, because it's tough to cover 8.5 at a total unless you think Houston's going to win like 60-40, which again, I don't think that's going to happen. Purdue doesn't turn the ball over. They shoot the 3 well. I think that game will go closer than people necessarily think, particularly with Smith there at the point guard, one of the best point guards in the country. And, again, Purdue does not turn the ball over a lot. So we'll see, but I think brutal numbers tonight. I do like Kentucky. I thought the numbers last night were brutal. I'm looking at these numbers for Saturday. I don't think they're easy either. That Texas Tech Florida game, I lean a little bit towards Texas Tech because I happen to think, look, Gators were one of the easy picks coming in. A lot of people have them the 4. A lot of people have them the 2. I don't think through the last 2 games they've played particularly well at all. I think they got very fortunate against UConn that UConn could not shoot the ball, particularly in the first half, to save their lives in that game. And then Maryland, fell apart in the second half, but through the first half of that game, to me, that looked like that was going to go down to a last possession game. Get in the other Saturday game, Duke laying 6.5 to Alabama. To me, it's a coin flip. If Alabama shoots like they did last night, Alabama's going to beat Duke straight up. There was not a team in the country that was beating Alabama last night the way they shot the basketball. But if they don't shoot like that again, Duke's probably going to win the game by 20 with their, their overall length and offensive efficiency. So you tell me, are we going to get another repeat? Because this is honestly, to some degree, the story of Alabama basketball for the last 2 years. When the threes are going down, and again, if you watch them, they don't care about the college line. They're shooting from the NBA line about half the time anyway. When the threes are going down, that team is a juggernaut. But are they going to do that again against the Duke team, or is Duke's length on the defensive end going to bother them? I have no idea. Should be a hell of a game. But again, in terms of forecasting the numbers, I think these are all really difficult matchups. Again, only thing I would lean to would be Kentucky tonight.
And the tournament still appears to be, I mean, even by your analysis just now about these upcoming games, somewhat wide open. I don't know that anybody can say definitively, okay, Duke's going to win it all or Florida's going to win it all. As you said, they were suspect. Auburn coming in, they had those 3 out of 4 losses at the end of the regular season. Kind
And
of
have turned it right around against two
yeah,
difficult opponents.
made you think, okay, maybe I can dismiss them with a little more confidence than I might have otherwise. Because I thought before that little streak that Auburn was being largely overlooked as a natural and probably a winning favorite. But yeah, so
I did too, and I got kind of off of them coming into the tournament. Again, stumbled in that last week or week and a half of the regular season, but then come in, cruised to their first run game, which again this year is not that big a deal. All the ones cruised, but I thought Auburn had one of the more difficult second round matchups. I thought Houston had the toughest with Gonzaga, but I thought Auburn was going to get pushed by a Creighton team that played very well at the end of the season, played great in their opening round matchup against Louisville, and then really didn't seem to bother Auburn much at all throughout the course of that basketball game. So Auburn coming in with a lot of momentum. If they go out and throttle Michigan tonight, I think maybe you have to install them as one of the co-favorites. We'll see.
I
mean,
crossed. I need a Michigan State matchup.
We might be on our way to an Obama dream bracket with number one seeds. It's certainly.
Wouldn't that be something if he won the ESPN pool after all those years of being ridiculed for picking on
right?
That'd be kind of wild. And a winner, wow, $1 million goes to Barack Obama. That'd be awesome. But even Michelle was giving him the look, the fish
Right,
out after he would put all the 4 number 1 seeds into the Final Four and then pick the favorite to win it all. So that may turn out to be the case, though. I mean, most annoying thing that happens right now, you have the annoying tendencies and characteristics of dealing with the tournament, the people that you would least like to be around. But is there anything worse than somebody telling you, yeah, well, all 4 of my Final Four teams are still alive? It's
Yep.
like, yeah, but you look like a schmuck the rest of the way. What are you talking about?
I mean, again, it's one of those things where if you watch a ton of college basketball, you tend to want to overpick upsets.
Yes.
And this year is
Wasn't
shaping
there.
up like a nightmare for you.
Yeah.
Thus far, again, the pool PC runs. It's a smaller. I think there's maybe 30 entries. I'm like number 11, and Blake, who the other guy we know from Defo Radio, really into college basketball, he's like number 16. So neither one of us exactly tearing it up with our upset picks.
Is there a cleaning lady entry in your pool, or do you automatically have to?
I mean, it's a guy, so it might be a cleaning guy. I don't know.
Even an artificially intelligence-generated cleaning lady still probably prevails.
Okay, so I have to ask about the bare knuckle fights.
Oh yeah, I went to the bare knuckle fight championship last night. A guy named Feldman is the guy that runs it. Damon Feldman, I believe, is his name, and it was an interesting spectacle for me to observe, being Mr. Old Geezer boxing fan.
Do they have a Butterbean-like character? Because I feel like if you're going to do something like bare knuckle fights,
find a big fat guy.
You want a Butterbean. You want like a big fat guy who can just beat people to a pulp, but that like everybody roots for him because he's a big fat guy.
I'm wondering, where they're deriving the talent from. Is it from these backyard brawls, like an old Kimbo Slice type of thing?
Right.
And this has been around for a while, and yet it seems like it had to have been revamped under this Feldman, who, I mean, they're killing it also. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, Luby and I were there at the Hard Rock, not this last one, but a couple times ago, and it was packed. I mean, people are super into this.
I mean, many thousands of people were in attendance there. The upper deck of what is a 7,000 seat theater wasn't full, but they also had some people on the floor, and I would say it looked a lot better in terms of the empty seats that you see at a Marlins opening day game. It was filled in well all the way around the arena. But a lot of the guys, at least that I saw. Now I was there for the early prelims, and then once the actual show started, it still held up in the early portion anyway, where guys being introduced, and his record is an impeccable 2-0. So it seemed like they must have recruited a lot of new talent for this, and I'm not sure where they come from. I guess you have guys that were in MMA and maybe some guys that boxed. But as I was saying, I mean, if you wanted a job in sports right now, be a cut man at the bare knuckle boxing because even the ref is taking shots. It's kind of crazy. But this is if it's Gen Z that's into it, I could not believe how enthusiastic the crowd was, and because these guys really had no resume or history. It's not like you were watching a guy step into the ring and he's 25-2, and you've seen him many, many times on TV. They had incredible followings, especially, and this may be the formula that they use all over the country, but I would imagine it would be hard to do everywhere. Where most of the fighters on the card, at least one in every bout, was from the location city. In
Right.
this case, it was Fort Lauderdale, essentially Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and many local fighters were on the card fighting against guys that came from all over the country. So, do they do that in every city? Is that part of the thing? And maybe that sparks ticket sales because there's always pressure on whoever participates in these kind of events, even in boxing, a small local show. Hey, well, can you sell 100 tickets? And that's how they get their name on the card. But interesting, well produced, very slick. Naturally, before the bout started, odds go up. And I'm thinking, on what basis would you be betting on these fighters, except to think immediately that it's largely going to be the hometown favorite that wins? And they were up at prohibitive odds, like negative 500, that sort of
Oh,
thing,
okay.
in a match where clearly, I mean, one errant punch that happens to land can
Right.
and knock the guy right into the third row. So interesting, though. I would not have thought. I knew it was popular because it keeps returning to the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino here in Miami, and that's the second one I've seen there in like the last 6 months. And there's a buzz around it. The sports book was nothing compared to in terms of the sort of buzz and excitement. And that should have been rocking, right? You had Major League Baseball, you had college basketball on, resumption of the tournament.
And the Gators playing.
Yes, and then right next door in the theater there is this bare knuckle boxing, and that's where everybody was heading. It was just unbelievable. So I guess some promise for the sport, and maybe something else we have to end up analyzing here on TV, even
Defo
though
in on the ground floor of the next MMA.
it's there. There's no question, and it would be something that I would have a tendency to just completely ignore, except that
Me
there's other
too.
hits. I might make a little score out of this latest.
No, I mean, look, yep, look, we talk about this with all. I don't understand. Yeah, again, when like 5 years ago, everything in boxing was turning to like these YouTubers and these TikTok kids fighting each other.
Jake Paul,
I couldn't care less.
right,
And now it has completely taken over the sport of boxing.
right,
I'm not an MMA guy. The only times we've been at, I've never been to like a live MMA event, but the only times we've gone to like Bruise Room or somewhere to watch the fights, I'm not into the MMA crowds. A bunch of dudes in tap out shirts looking like
yeah.
they're gonna fight each other at any second. Um, Again, it's not my scene.
No, I'm not a big MMA fan, although
The power slap thing looks repulsive to me. Like but if people are into it, people are into it. I
the
mean,
whole concept is foreign and contrary to everything I grew up believing. That when you have a guy on the ground, even if he's a mortal enemy of yours who has been insulting you and your family for years, and you finally have this guy in a completely compromising position, he's on the ground, you stop hitting the guy and you let him up. And when you see, I mean, it really looks like two, older Jewish kids back in the neighborhood where, the guy gets the other guy down and they sort of, don't do anything for a while. And then one guy gives the other guy a noogie and he gets up and runs away. I mean,
but
doesn't do it for me.
look at our friend, the great Blake, who those of you in the WWE know him as Blake Howard. We knew him by a different name when he was doing radio with us. This kid could not have been more into conventional sports
Yeah.
I mean, short of me, I don't know anybody who is more into all sports, baseball, football, basketball. But his thing was pro wrestling, and you're like, well, and now he's working for the WWE, just like the biggest thing on television in terms of week to
Sure.
week live sports. They sign a new contract with some big network every week. It seems like, and it's gone from like one thing, just Monday Night Raw or whatever, to now they have like 8 shows. I mean,
Every night of the week, yeah.
so
Yeah.
whatever people are into, people are into. You,
This
you
this was
can't
a
hate on
little
them.
bit of an eye opener for me because I would have thought you'd have a very sparse crowd and a
That's what
big
I would
sliver
think
to
too.
find people that were into it. Yeah, so it turned out pretty well, and then the basketball games kind of went my way last night, and the
Nice.
way of the people here on Barry or Bookie. I
Well,
think.
I'm glad somebody on the show found some numbers they like in this round because, like I said, I've been looking at it up and down for a week, and I basically a series of coin flips to me.
All right, Professor, play of the day though. Kentucky, little taste on the money line, just a
Hmm.
little sprinkle. All right, and then of course getting 4.5 from Tennessee. They've beaten Tennessee twice. It's kind of interesting to me that all of a sudden they're a 4.5 point dog because they have 2 wins over Tennessee during the regular season.
And looked very good last round, but again, Tennessee does have that two in front of their name. And to be honest, the Vols closed strong, playing their way into the NCAA, excuse me, the SEC tournament finals, and then have basically cruised through 2 rounds. A lot of people thought UCLA was going to push them in the last round. Kind of looked like a bad matchup, defensive team versus defensive team, but they got through that with relative ease. So we'll see. I understand the line, just again in terms of seating numbers and whatnot, but I tend to go the other way a little bit.
Any vision at this point as to or assessment of who's going to win it all?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by reassessment because
Yeah, I mean, I
I
don't know
was
who you had winning it, but
the 2 teams or excuse me, the 3 teams everybody was talking about were the 3 Duke, Auburn, Florida seeds, and I kind of faded those and went with I think Houston's got an excellent shot. I think through 2 rounds, Houston is playing exactly how they want to play.
all right.
I think they've among the 1 seeds, probably including tonight, had the toughest path so far. So if they manage to cruise through tonight, I continue to roll with the Houston Cougars. It just felt like time to me. If you look in terms of program arc, that this would be the year where maybe Houston would break through after basically flirting with it since the COVID year. They've made some good runs, and I don't see any reason to get off of that. I think they're better offensively than they have really been at any time during this Kelvin Sampson run, while still being absolutely elite defensively and rebounding the basketball. So I'm not going to get off the Cougars. Again, I hate picking the number one, being the chalk eating pig.
But I mean, only one team can win. So if you're going to be right about it, let's face it, you
Yeah,
got with your gut instinct there. And yeah, I need Houston to win it all too, which is probably a bad omen for you.
yeah, probably.
Yeah. I just took a shot there. Everybody was on Duke. A lot of people love the Gators coming into this
I
thing.
mean, look, and they all the ones thus far, however much you loved them, have sort of justified it. Again, to me, Florida has not been playing good basketball,
Yeah.
but they keep figuring out how to win, which is always a good sign. Uh, Duke has rolled. Auburn has rolled through 2 games. I mean, again, to me, that Duke game was actually a pretty easy win for Duke, even though it got a little tight, particularly against the number
Right.
last night. But I think they look great. It looks like the chalk eating pig tournament. What was it, like 10 or 15 years ago? We had the 4 number 1s. I think UCLA ended up winning that one. But we'll see.
All right. Excellent stuff as always, Professor. Good luck with all your plays. Thanks so much for joining us here on Barry Your Bookie.
You have a great one, Deef.
All right, the professor, ladies and gentlemen. We did hit our lone winner. We gave out Houston, the Astros, with theory, some kind of logic behind it yesterday to win on opening day behind Framber Valdez, who was always a good bet for me last year. Framber Valdez on the hill for the Astros, who may have been depleted, but much steam came in favor of the New York Mets in terms of the betting action. The Astros, you were only laying 115 to win 100. And they prevailed 3-1 because Clayton Holmes just seemed like an oddity to be the opening day starter. I'm thinking if that is what the Mets are going to be presenting as their opening day starter, a guy that's a converted reliever, Didn't think he was going to go very far in the game. He got into the fourth inning. He gave up single runs in the first three. Those held up, and we had our first winner of the season there. So 1 for 1. We may just rest on our laurels there and not pick another baseball game all year. But we will be picking some stuff for you on Monday. Thanks for tuning in. Our thanks to the professor for all of the people connected with the program. I'm Jeff DeForrest, hoping that you have a great weekend in terms of burying your bookie.